I don't know how many people are cooking, but we know what farmers markets look like compared to what they looked like 20 years ago. We know what supermarkets look like. That stuff is encouraging. I think that it's going to be easier and easier for people to get better and better ingredients. You know, whether Amazon winds up being on the right side of that or the wrong side of that, I don't know.
You're listening to the Taste Podcast. I'm Editor-in-Chief Matt Rodbard, here with Senior Editor Anna Hezel.
On today's show, we have Mark Bittman, who's a very prolific cookbook writer. His most recent book is How to Grill Everything. And later on in the show, we'll be talking to Therese Nelson, who's a taste cook in resident. But first of all, Matt, what did you and Mark talk about?
Wow, Mark Bittman. Mark has a lot of opinions, and I love that he and I had this pretty frank conversation in front of a crowd at Books Are Magic. He talked about how he walked into the New Haven Advocate and basically told them that their current food critic was terrible and he should be the critic. He later got the job.
That takes guts. I've never done that before.
Yeah, he got the job. And then he later would write for the Washington Post and New York Times, write his minimalist column, and write his series of How to Cook Everything cookbooks that have sold millions and millions of copies. He also admits that he still has terrible knife skills.
Wow, that really surprises me.
It's surprising. It's honest. I think we all kind of have terrible knife skills compared to the chefs, but he says that really it does not matter. And I think that's why I like Mark. He's pretty honest.
Here's Mark talking to Matt at Books Are Magic in Brooklyn.
My first question is, do you read the comments? I mean that only because you put yourself out there quite often. You wrote a column for years in the New York Times, a home cooking column, but then you transitioned to the op-ed page, which had you writing about all sorts of topics, food policy, etc. So do you read the comments?
Well, you know, it's funny. When I started writing, comments came in envelopes. And, you know, a piece of mail would arrive either at the paper or occasionally at my house. And you'd look at it, and once in a while, you know, and it wasn't like hundreds a week. It was like 3 a week or 7 or whatever. And it was manageable, and you look at them, and sometimes they're interesting, and once in a while you'd write back, and that was that. I mean, the short answer is no. When it became an online thing, it became impossible, and, you know, we all know about the potential for rudeness and cruelty online. And if you have a thin skin, you know, you can read 99 things that say you're the greatest, and you read one thing that says you suck, and that's the one you remember. So, yeah, I can't read everything that everybody thinks about.
No, of course you can. So I wanted to talk about your start in food writing. I think it was kind of shocking to me when I found out your history. You walked into the New Haven Advocate and you said, a New Haven Advocate, you need a new restaurant reviewer because your restaurant reviewer is not very good. That's not a paraphrase. It's pretty accurate, right?
No, it's totally true. That is the truth. I was in a karate class with a guy named Chris Angerman.
That's awesome. Cobra Kai style, like in the 80s? Like
Shotokan karate. Okay. And Chris was a graduate student at Yale. I had nothing to do with Yale. I just lived in New Haven. And Chris was doing theater reviews for the weekly paper. And I said, how did you get that gig? And he said, oh, just go up there and ask for George DeStefano. And I mean, that's what it was like. And I went in and I said, I want to see George DeStefano. And they said, third door on the right. Such was security in 1980. And George said, what do you want? And I did say that. And he said, well, write me something and we'll see. And I went home and long-handed 3 or 4 versions of this piece that I had in mind. And then I typed it up and I brought it in. And then I became, you know, for $50 a week, less expenses, the New Haven Advocate's restaurant reviewer.
For a while. And then you kind of evolved into a recipe writer because I remember you telling me you were eating pesto and doing a story about pesto. And there's
You're
like
amazing.
What's that?
You're amazing.
I just remember, I mean, this is a story that stuck with me. Like, how do you were reviewing pesto, and then you were like, there's 5 chefs in my town who make pesto, and I can do it better.
Well, that's not exactly accurate, but
pretty close.
Close enough, yeah. No, I was at this restaurant, and really I was getting paid $50 a week, and I had to pay for the meals. So I think part of my motivation was financial. Like if I could not pay for the meals, then I could make $50 a week. But so we went to this restaurant and the pesto was like terrible. And so I wrote this piece that said, we went to this restaurant. Here's what we ate. Wasn't very good. Here's how you could do it at home. It'll be better. And then I evolved it into a
career
recipe column. Yeah.
Well, you evolved into a career kind of. I think you have taken that, you've channeled that I can do it better idea, and you've done it for many different cuisines. So I think that's really interesting that you were able to, because you weren't really a home cook. I mean, you were cooking for your family. You weren't trained, right? You were just cooking a lot for your family.
No, I used to say until about 95, I would say I've had no formal training, and it was true. I took a cooking class in New Haven. That was the kind of cooking class anybody might take, and that was fun, but it certainly wasn't arduous training. I still have terrible knife skills. And
most people have terrible knife skills unless they do
I don't think it matters that much. I've always wanted to do a kind of demo where you'd be like someone with great knife skills and someone with terrible knife skills, and they cook exactly the same dish, and the person with great knife skills finishes 90 seconds earlier than the person with terrible knife skills. Anyway.
So what makes a Mark Bittman recipe? Like, seriously, I want to segue this because I think you have this. I mean, The Matrix, for example, one of your last books, is like very limited ingredients, and it's all about cooking intuitively.
Well, I think part of it was that, so I didn't have any training, and I was just cooking from cookbooks. And I did have these kids, and I did work. And so every day I would go shopping. I spent a lot of time in fish stores because I was really obsessed with fish. But I would go shopping most days, and I'd come home, and I would have no idea what I was going to make. And then I would sit there with these cookbooks in a little semicircle and look up kind of the same recipe in each cookbook and say, okay, I can do that. So I guess at this point I was kind of advanced. But then there was never enough time, so I just do the simplest version of everything that I could imagine.
But it was all about repetition. You were cooking a lot at home, and that's how you got like your chops, right? You were kind of forcing yourself.
To the extent I have chops, yeah. I mean, yes, I cooked at home every night, or most nights. I worked at home, so I cooked lunch most days also. And it was a sort of autodidact kind of thing. I mean, I didn't, as I said, I used to say I had no training, and then I cooked every week for 2 years with Jean-Georges Van Gersten. So that, I think, counts as training.
That was when you were working on a book with him?
Yeah. So that I learned stuff I would maybe never have figured out myself, or maybe I would have eventually, but
you wrote one of your first books was about seafood and fish cookery, and you say it still sells quite well. I mean, what draws you to that topic, like cooking with seafood?
It was my first book, Fish, and that's what it's called, Fish. I think many people will say that their first book was in a way their baby, because it took me 12 years to write Fish, because I was writing about fish from the beginning, and I did a series about fish for the Washington Post, and I went out on boats, and as I said, I hung out in New Haven and back in the day when it was it was a great town for fish retail. I could talk about that for a long time. I won't. But I knew a lot about it, and I really loved the topic, and I wanted to write about it. It took a long time to sell that book and a long time to write it, and it did well, and that really is what launched
That sent you on your way, and you started collaborating with chefs, and you started working at Cooks as well. I mean,
Fish came out and won a couple of awards, and then I was asked to do How to Cook Everything, and we didn't call it that then. But so that was one sort of direction. At the same time, the Times asked me if I wanted a weekly column, which obviously no one says no to that. And
were you nervous to take on a weekly column for the New York Times?
I don't. I'm nervous now about the work that I'm doing. I think I was too dumb to be nervous then, or it's just like too excited. I mean, there was no time to be nervous. So it was really an amazing thing. And now the work that I'm doing, now that I'm like quasi-successful and known and all of that, I feel like in a way there's more to lose, and the work I do is also in a way more challenging. So honestly, I'm nervous now. I'm not nervous at this moment, but
No, you seem pretty chill on the stage. But talking, I mean, I wanted to talk to you about this Haiti piece you wrote for New York Magazine because there was some backlash to that story, just about the usage of some words. And do you feel like that backlash was deserved? I mean, is that part of this nervous for what you're doing now?
no, I'm nervous about what I'm doing now because I'm worried that I'm not going to do a good enough job, which is always what drives you to do a good enough job. So, yeah.
I just thought that it was an interesting piece because you used the word peasants, and like there was like it was like a semantic conversation about using the usage of peasants.
Yeah, I don't think it's a major conversation.
Yeah.
Peasants call themselves peasants, and peasant organizations call themselves peasant organizations. So the fact that people don't all know that is just an educational thing.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, just like people picking apart the language. Do you think has it changed over the course of the past like 5 years, 10 years, the way that words and food writing have been picked apart? There's a lot of, I mean, food writing right now is just becomes, it's more controversial than ever, it feels like.
I mean, I think you probably know more about that than I do, but I think the insistence that new voices be heard is fabulous. I think the claims and accusations about cultural appropriation are interesting, sometimes right, sometimes not. I think you have to look at things on a case-by-case basis. I think the open conversation is a terrific thing. So.
I agree. And I think that that's where we're at with Twitter right now. It's like kind of an open conversation about these topics for good or for bad, right?
Well, I'm not looking at Twitter anymore either, but yeah.
You've retired from Twitter.
I've really retired.
Yeah.
That's totally a one-way street for me. I really don't look at it.
Yeah, I agree. I have to say that it's a good thing that you're not like in the trenches of Twitter. I was like witnessing a Twitter attack today of a prominent writer, and I just felt you should be just writing. Don't like stay the fuck off Twitter and just write like essays and write great work. But you were in Haiti because you were researching a future book project about global foodways, and I wanted to hear a little bit about that. But I also wanted to find out if you're going to travel around the world and explore global foodways, what about America?
The book I'm working on I say it's a history of food and humanity and how they've interacted. Right now I'm working on the history part, so I don't think travel's that essential. You're not going to go to Sumer and find out anything, or Rome particularly. So we'll see what happens when I get into the present and the future part of the book, how much traveling I'm going to do and where I'm going to go. I'd like to finish this book being hopeful and maybe even optimistic. So anywhere that'll make me feel that way, I'm glad to go. Frankly, and I'll say this for the record, but I'm not sure I'm right. So I say it with some hesitation. I think the United States is going to be increasingly isolated in the way that we raise and market and sell food, and that other countries are going to do a better job of it more quickly than we will, and that more interesting things are going to happen in places like India and Haiti than are happening here right now.
What slows America down then? What's causing this?
The hegemony of industrial agriculture. Right. It's really simple.
Yeah.
I mean, how much good food can you produce if you are producing mostly corn and soybeans?
Right. It's just the diversity of crops that we talk about this a lot and write about it. Like we just don't have that need because it's a global foodway for us, right? We just can't.
Right. Well, I mean, it's been 200 years or 400, depending on how you're counting, that farming has moved in this direction of growing crops for sale as opposed to growing crops to eat. So if someone said, what should a food system look like? You might say it should be a system that grows food to nourish people and maybe do as little damage as possible along the way. And that is not what our food system is. Our food system is designed to make profits and ignore everything else. I think other countries are more capable of seeing that and changing that and moving in a different direction than we are because we're so strongly dominated by the companies that basically
stock
invented
prices.
that.
Yeah, and stock prices and earning reports. But what are you seeing in India? I'm really fascinated. That excites you. That makes you want to report this book that American readers can learn from. Our society.
There's a state in India called Andhra Pradesh that's actively supporting sustainable farming. So costs for those farmers are down. They say yields are up, and farmer suicide rates, which is a big deal in India and in the United States for that matter, are falling. So it's a thing that's going to work, and it's something that people are going to pay attention to.
What did you eat in India that was absolutely delicious that you just
the coolest thing?
Yeah,
I came back swearing I was going to write about this, but I didn't. The coolest thing is a chili that's cured in salt and buttermilk for like days and then deep fried. That was really good, like a poblano kind of chili, like not a super hot chili, but a really flavorful chili. Like delicious. I know it's like not a dish, right? It's a chili, but it was that. I mean, I've been to India before. There wasn't a lot that was new. That was new.
That's cool.
I was in the South. I hadn't been in the South before, so.
So the topic of this book is grilling. Like why write this? I mean, it's a beautiful book. There's 200. How many recipes?
Yeah, 200 how many,
recipes,
something like that. Yeah.
Like about grilling. Like why was this book needed?
Well, that's a very tricky question because it's not clear that it was needed, but.
Publisher thought so.
The publisher thought so. I thought so. I actually am not that big a fan of